Thunder rolls across Portland's November sky as Marcus Hayes stares at the Riverside Athletic Center. Rain pelts the parking lot, but inside, warm light beckons. His friends wave from the entrance, soccer cleats in hand. Then it hits him a flash of twisted metal, screaming voices, the taste of copper. The steel framework above the court crashes down like dominoes. Marcus blinks. The vision fades, but dread settles in his chest like ice. The Riverside Athletic Center sits nestled between Portland's industrial district and the Willamette River, its corrugated metal exterior showing decades of Pacific Northwest weather. Built in the 1980s as a community project, the facility has hosted thousands of games, from youth leagues to adult pickup matches. Tonight, the November rain drums against the roof with unusual intensity, creating a steady metallic rhythm that seems to pulse with the building itself. Marcus pulls his truck into the gravel parking lot, windshield wipers struggling against the downpour. Through the rain-streaked glass, he watches his friends gather near the entrance. Diego emerges from his Honda Civic, athletic bag slung over his shoulder, while Kenny bounds from his beat-up Subaru with characteristic enthusiasm despite the weather. The vision still clings to Marcus's consciousness like morning fog, the groaning of metal, the sharp crack of breaking welds, faces frozen in terror. He's experienced these flashes before, usually during construction inspections when something wasn't quite right. His crew learned to trust his instincts after he de-spotted hairline fractures in support beams that engineers had missed. "Marcus, you coming, or what?" Kenny's voice cuts through the rain as he waves from beneath the facility's small overhang. The warmth inside the building hits Marcus immediately as they enter. The familiar smell of rubber flooring mixed with the faint sweetness of sports drinks creates an oddly comforting atmosphere. Overhead, industrial fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the court, but they also illuminate something that makes Marcus's stomach drop: the massive steel framework supporting the roof. The trusses span the width of the building in geometric patterns, each joint held together by bolts and welds that Marcus's trained eye automatically analyzes. Some of the connections show rust stains, and he notices a slight sag in one of the main support beams that wasn't there last month. Place looks the same as always, Diego observes, dropping his bag on the bleachers. Though that rain's really coming down. Good thing we're inside. Kenny's already changed into his cleats, bouncing a soccer ball on his knee. Weather app said this storm system's supposed to be the biggest of the season. Perfect night for indoor soccer, right guys? Marcus forces a smile, but his gaze keeps drifting upward. The vision replays in fragments metal groaning under pressure, the distinctive sound of structural failure he's heard on job sites. In his mind, he sees the exact sequence: the northeast corner giving way first, then a cascade failure as the weight redistributes impossibly fast. "Everything okay, man?" Diego asks, noticing Marcus's distraction. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just checking out the ceiling," Marcus replies, his voice tighter than he intends. "Some of those welds look pretty old." The building groans softly as a particularly strong gust of wind hits the exterior. It's a normal sound buildings flex and settle all the time. But to Marcus, it sounds like a countdown timer, each creak marking time until disaster strikes. Other players begin arriving for their weekly game. Jim from the Postal Service, a couple of college students, Mike who works at the brewery downtown. The familiar routine should be comforting, but Marcus feels the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. He remembers the last time he'd ignored one of these feelings, a warehouse project in Beaverton 3 years ago. He'd mentioned his concerns to the site supervisor, but deadlines were tight and the inspector had already signed off. 2 weeks after completion, a section of the roof collapsed during a storm. No one was hurt, but it could have been catastrophic. The rain continues its relentless assault on the roof above, each drop adding to the stress load on aging infrastructure. Marcus watches the steel beams, looking for the telltale signs of imminent failure, micro-movements, stress concentrations, the subtle deflection that precedes catastrophe. You know what? Marcus says suddenly, his voice cutting through the pre-game chatter. Maybe we should call it off tonight. The group pauses their preparations, surprised. Marcus never cancels games. He's the one who usually rallies everyone together, rain or shine. Because of a little rain? Kenny laughs, gesturing toward the dry court. Come on, man. We've been planning this all week. Marcus looks around at his friends' expectant faces, then up at the steel framework one more time. The vision pulses in his memory, not just the collapse, but the exact timing. It happens during the game, when everyone's focused on the ball, when no one's watching the ceiling. Something's not right up there, he says, pointing to the roof structure. I think we should. A particularly loud crack of thunder cuts him off, and the lights flicker momentarily. When they steady, Marcus sees it. A hairline crack in one of the main welds, barely visible, but unmistakably there. His blood runs cold. The vision wasn't just a possibility, it was a warning. The crack in the weld stares back at Marcus like an accusation. It's barely an inch long, running perpendicular to the stress line. Exactly the type of failure that propagates rapidly under load. His construction training kicks in automatically. Assess, evacuate, report. But convincing his friends to leave based on a hairline fracture and a gut feeling feels impossible. Seriously, what's gotten into you? Diego asks, following Marcus's gaze upward. I don't see anything wrong. Kenny has already started juggling the soccer ball, the rhythmic thumping echoing off the walls. Each bounce seems to vibrate through the floor and up into the structure above. Marcus watches the suspect beam, looking for any sign of movement, any indication that the crack is growing. Look, I know this sounds crazy, Marcus begins, pulling out his phone's flashlight to illuminate the suspect joint. But see that line there? That's a stress fracture. And with this wind load from the storm, ... Dude, you're freaking out over nothing, Kenny interrupts, still bouncing the ball. This place has been here since before we were born. It's not going anywhere. The other players have formed a loose circle, warming up with passing drills. The familiar sound of cleats on rubber flooring mingles with the rain above, creating a comfortable rhythm that feels deceptively safe. Marcus knows that in 20 minutes, when the game hits full intensity, the vibrations from running feet will add just enough dynamic load to push the compromised structure past its breaking point. Diego sets down his water bottle and walks closer to Marcus. Is this like that warehouse thing you told me about? When you had that feeling? Marcus nods, grateful that someone remembers. Same kind of sensation. Like watching a slow-motion car accident that hasn't happened yet. The temperature in the building feels oppressive now, despite the cool November air outside. Marcus notices that the heating system is working overtime, the ductwork attached to the same steel framework that's causing his concern. Additional weight, additional stress points. What if you're wrong? Kenny asks, pausing his ball juggling. What if we pack up and leave, and nothing happens? We lose our court time, and Jim's been looking forward to this all week. His wife just had surgery, and this is his only break. It's a fair point that cuts deep. Marcus glances at Jim, who's stretching in the corner, clearly grateful for the distraction from his home situation. The moral weight of potentially ruining everyone's evening based on an unsubstantiated feeling wars with the certainty that something terrible is about to happen. The building settles again with a soft groan. To everyone else, it's background noise. To Marcus, it's a death rattle. Look at it this way, Diego suggests, trying to find middle ground. What would it take to convince you the building's safe? Maybe we could do a quick inspection. Marcus considers this. His knowledge of structural engineering is practical, not theoretical. He can spot obvious problems, but determining the exact failure threshold of a decades-old steel framework in real time isn't something he can do with confidence. "The main load-bearing connection points," he says finally. "If we check those and they look solid, maybe I'm just being paranoid." They walk the perimeter of the court, Marcus pointing out the critical joints while explaining what to look for. Most of the connections appear solid, showing the expected wear patterns of a building that's been properly maintained. But that one crack nags at him, a single point of failure in a system designed with redundancy. Kenny's phone buzzes with a weather alert. Severe thunderstorm warning until midnight. Winds up to 60 miles per hour. He looks up at Marcus with newfound respect. That's actually pretty intense. The building shudders as a particularly strong gust hits the exterior walls. Its normal response buildings are designed to flex with wind loads. But Marcus hears something else in the sound. The high-pitched squeal of metal under stress, like a guitar string being tuned too tight. "Okay," Diego says finally. "What's your professional opinion? Scale of 1 to 10, how dangerous is it to play tonight?" Marcus stares at the crack, trying to quantify the unquantifiable. The vision shows catastrophic failure, but visions aren't engineering reports. The crack is real, but small. The storm is severe, but the building has weathered worse. Honestly, 6 or 7, he admits. High enough that I wouldn't bet my life on it. "But you can't be sure," Kenny presses. "I can't be sure of anything. That's the problem." The other players have started asking what's taking so long. Marcus feels the weight of their evening plans, their need for normalcy and recreation, pressing against his growing certainty that they need to leave. The soccer ball continues its steady bounce in the background, counting down to something irreversible. Jim approaches the group, concern evident on his weathered face. "Everything all right? You guys look like you're having a serious discussion." Marcus meets his eyes and sees a man who desperately needs this break from reality. This chance to focus on something simple and fun while his wife recovers from surgery. The weight of potentially taking that away feels almost as heavy as the responsibility of keeping everyone safe. The building groans again, and this time, Marcus swears he sees the crack extend just slightly. The crack has definitely grown. What was an inch 30 minutes ago now stretches nearly 3 inches across the critical weld joint. Marcus measures it with his eyes, using techniques learned from years of structural inspections. The progression follows the classic pattern of catastrophic failure, slow at first, then accelerating exponentially. "We need to leave, now." His voice carries the authority of someone who's made life-or-death construction calls before. "Marcus, come on," Kenny protests, but there's less certainty in his voice now. The weather outside has intensified, with wind gusts rattling the building's metal siding. "Maybe we could just play for 30 minutes? Keep it light?" The suggestion makes Marcus's stomach clench. In his vision, the collapse happens during active play, specifically during a scramble near the north goal, when the vibrations from multiple players jumping simultaneously create a resonance frequency that the weakened structure couldn't handle. Diego has been quietly observing the suspect joint, comparing it to others around the building. I hate to say it, but Marcus might be right. That crack looks different from the other wear patterns. The admission feels like a small victory, but Marcus knows that partial agreement isn't enough. They all need to leave together, or someone will inevitably get hurt. In disaster scenarios, holdouts are often the victims, the person who stays behind to grab one more thing, or who thinks they can handle the risk. Jim walks over, concern etched on his face. "Is there really a problem? Because I can call the facility manager if you think there's a safety issue. By the time anyone official gets here, it'll be too late." Marcus explains. These things happen fast once they start. And this storm, ... He gestures toward the rain-lashed windows. "It's adding stress load we can't calculate." The building's heating system kicks on with a mechanical rumble that travels through the ductwork and into the steel framework. Marcus watches the crack, half expecting it to jump another inch with the added vibration. It doesn't, but he notices something worse, a slight deflection in the beam, barely perceptible, but definitely there. "Look, I get that this is your area of expertise," one of the college students says, "but this building's been here forever. Don't you think you might be overreacting?" It's the question Marcus has been asking himself. Professional paranoia versus legitimate concern. The difference between a career-ending false alarm and a life-saving decision. But the vision felt too real, too specific. And now the physical evidence is backing up his intuition. Kenny sets down the soccer ball, and the sudden silence feels ominous. "What exactly did you see? In your... whatever you want to call it?" Marcus closes his eyes, letting the vision replay. The northeast corner gives way first. Right above where we usually set up the water bottles. The whole framework comes down in sections, not all at once, but like dominoes. Maybe 15 seconds from start to finish. 15 seconds, Diego repeats. That's not much time to get out. That's why we need to leave before it starts. The wind outside reaches a new level of intensity, howling around the building's corners with a sound like a freight train. Through the windows, they can see tree branches bending at impossible angles and debris skittering across the parking lot. The storm has evolved beyond typical northwest weather into something genuinely dangerous. See? Marcus S. phone buzzes with an emergency alert. National Weather Service. Tornado watch. Issued for Multnomah County until 11 p.m. Seek sturdy shelter immediately. The irony isn't lost on him, they being told to seek sturdy shelter while standing inside what he believes is a structural time bomb. Tornado watch, he announces, showing the alert to the group. Kenny says with forced optimism, "We're already inside. This is the sturdy shelter. Not if the roof comes down. The crack measures 4 inches now." Marcus is certain of it, though he doesn't announce this development to the group. The propagation rate is accelerating, following the textbook progression of stress fracture failure. At this rate, they have maybe an hour before the critical threshold, less if the wind load continues to increase. Diego pulls Marcus aside, lowering his voice. "How sure are you about this? Sure enough to bet my life on it?" The question is whether I'm sure enough to bet everyone else's life on it too. That's not really how it works, though. If you're right, and we stay, we're all betting our lives against your judgment. If you're wrong, and we leave, we just miss a soccer game. The logic is sound, but Marcus knows that group dynamics rarely follow pure logic. People have a tendency to normalize risk, especially when leaving means facing an unpleasant alternative, in this case, driving home through what's becoming a genuinely dangerous storm. 5 more minutes, Jim says, approaching them. "Let's just see if the weather calms down a bit. I really need this tonight." Marcus understands the desperation in Jim's voice. The man needs normalcy, needs to focus on something other than hospital waiting rooms and insurance paperwork. But needing something and it being safe are two different things entirely. The heating system cycles off, and in the relative quiet, Marcus hears something new, a subtle creaking from the steel framework, rhythmic and persistent. It's the sound of metal under stress, of molecular bonds being stretched toward their breaking point. Outside, a tree branch crashes against one of the windows, spiderwebbing the glass but not breaking through. The sound makes everyone jump, and for a moment, Marcus thinks he has their attention. "That settles it," Diego announces. "Marcus, you've convinced me. We should go." 2 against 5, Kenny counters. "Come on, let's vote on it." The idea of democracy in a disaster scenario strikes Marcus as absurd, but he understands the social dynamics at play. No one wants to be the person who ruins everyone's evening based on an unsubstantiated fear. The crack reaches 5 inches, and Marcus makes his decision. "I'm leaving," Marcus announces, his voice cutting through the pre-game chatter with finality. "Anyone who wants to come with me is welcome." The simple declaration shifts the entire dynamic. Instead of trying to convince skeptics, he's forcing them to make their own choice. It's a psychological technique he's learned from construction sites when workers resist safety protocols. Sometimes, the best approach is to lead by example rather than argue. Diego immediately starts packing his gear. I'm with Marcus. His track record speaks for itself. Kenny looks conflicted, ball still balanced on his foot. You're really going to bail because of some tiny crack? The building's been here for 40 years. And metal fatigue is cumulative, Marcus replies, shouldering his bag. 40 years of stress cycles, and now we're adding wind loads it was never designed for. The crack now measures 6 inches, though Marcus keeps this observation to himself. At the current propagation rate, they have perhaps 30 minutes before the structure reaches its critical failure point. But he's learned that panic rarely helps calm. Decisive action does. Jim stands frozen near the center court, caught between his need for normalcy and growing awareness that something is genuinely wrong. What would happen if you're right? I mean, worst case scenario? Marcus considers his words carefully. Best case, the roof comes down and everyone gets out with minor injuries. Worst case ... double quotes. He doesn't finish the sentence. The building shudders again, and this time everyone notices. Dust motes drift down from the ceiling joints, visible in the harsh fluorescent light. It's a subtle sign, but unmistakable to anyone who knows what to look for. Okay, that was definitely weird, admits one of the college students. Kenny finally stops juggling the ball, his usual enthusiasm dampened by the increasingly obvious signs of structural stress. How long do we have if you're right? I don't know. Could be minutes, could be hours. But once it starts, there's no stopping it. The emergency alert system on everyone's S-phones erupts simultaneously with a piercing tone that echoes off the walls. The message is stark. Tornado warning for Multnomah County. Seek immediate shelter in sturdy interior room away from windows. This is not a drill. Tornado warning, Diego reads aloud. That's worse than a watch. Marcus feels vindicated, but takes no satisfaction in it. The atmospheric conditions that create tornadoes' rapid pressure changes, extreme wind shear, updrafts, and downdrafts are exactly the kind of dynamic loading that stress structures can't handle. We need to get to our cars and get out of here, he says, moving toward the exit. This building isn't going to protect us from anything. But Kenny raises a crucial point. Look outside. You can barely see the parking lot through this rain. Driving in these conditions might be more dangerous than staying here. It's true. The storm has reached the level where visibility is near zero, and the parking lot is already showing signs of flooding from overwhelmed storm drains. Leaving means navigating Portland's notoriously challenging hills in near whiteout conditions. Marcus peers through the windows at the chaos outside. Tree branches whip like tentacles, and he can see his truck rocking slightly in the wind. The rational part of his mind acknowledges that driving in these conditions carries its own significant risks. There's a difference between weather risks and structural risks, he argues. Weather is unpredictable. This building failure, I can see exactly how it's going to happen. The crack reaches 7 inches. The beam deflection is now visible to the naked eye if you know where to look. Marcus estimates 20 minutes until catastrophic failure, maybe less if the wind continues to intensify. What if we compromise? Jim suggests desperately. Move our stuff away from the northeast corner, play on the other side of the court. Marcus shakes his head. When that framework goes, it won't be surgical. The whole roof system is interconnected. One section fails, and the load redistributes to weaker points. It'll be like pulling cards from a house of cards. Diego has finished packing and stands by the exit, clearly ready to brave the storm rather than risk the building collapse. I trust Marcus's judgment. I'd rather deal with rain than falling steel. The wind outside reaches a new crescendo, and the building responds with a prolonged groan that seems to come from deep within its bones. This time, everyone hears it clearly, not just settling or normal flex, but the sound of a structure under genuine distress. "All right," Kenny says finally, deflating his soccer ball with sharp efficiency. "Maybe you're right. This is getting pretty intense." The college students exchange glances and begin gathering their equipment without further argument. The psychological tipping point has been reached once enough people accept the risk as real. The holdouts quickly follow. Only Jim remains conflicted, standing in the center of the court like someone trying to hold on to a disappearing dream. "I really needed this tonight," he says quietly. Marcus approaches him with genuine sympathy. "I know, man, but there'll be other games. Your wife needs you alive and in one piece." The emergency alert sounds again, this time with a different message. "Tornado spotted on ground moving northeast through Washington County. Take cover immediately." "That's heading right for us," Diego points out, studying the weather map on his phone. The crack reaches 8 inches. The beam deflection is now obvious even to untrained eyes. Marcus realizes they've passed the point of no return. The structure is going to fail whether they reinside or not. The only question is whether they'll be there when it happens. "Everyone out," he commands, using the voice that stops arguments on construction sites. "Right now, no discussion." The authority in his tone galvanizes the group. Equipment gets stuffed into bags with urgent efficiency, and the exodus begins. As they move toward the exit, Marcus takes one last look at the steel framework above. 9 inches. The crack has become a gaping wound in the building's structural integrity. They reach the parking lot just as the first tornado siren begins its mournful wail across Portland's skyline. The parking lot has transformed into a battlefield between earth and sky. Wind-driven rain hits them like bullets, and Marcus has to shout to be heard over the storm's roar. Their cars rock visibly in the gusts, and the flooding has deepened enough to cover the tire rims. "This is insane," Kenny yells, struggling to maintain his footing as they navigate toward their vehicles. "We can't drive in this." Diego's Honda Civic sits at an alarming angle, 2 wheels in what used to be a storm drain, but is now a rushing river of rainwater. "My car's not going anywhere," he calls out, pointing at the submerged vehicle. Marcus reaches his truck and finds it in better shape. 4-wheel drive and higher clearance give it a fighting chance. But the visibility is essentially zero, and the wind is strong enough to push even his heavy vehicle sideways. Behind them, the Riverside Athletic Center groans audibly over the storm noise. Marcus turns to see the building swaying slightly, not enough to be obvious to casual observers, but definitely moving beyond normal parameters. The crack in the steel beam has become academic. The entire structure is now compromised by dynamic wind loading. "Marcus," Jim calls out, panic edging his voice. "Look at the roof." The building's metal roofing has begun to peel back in sections, revealing the steel framework underneath. Marcus watches in horrified fascination as his vision begins to manifest in real time. But instead of a sudden collapse during a soccer game, the failure is happening gradually, giving them time to witness the slow-motion disaster. "We can't stay in the parking lot," Diego shouts, rain streaming down his face. "If that roof goes, the debris field will cover everything out here." It's true. The building's footprint is large enough that falling steel could easily reach their current position. They recaught between the immediate danger of the collapsing structure and the longer-term risk of trying to drive through tornado-level weather. Marcus's truck engine turns over on the third try, the familiar diesel rumble providing a small comfort in the chaos. "Everyone in," he yells, throwing open the doors. They pile into the cab, 5 adults in a space designed for 3, but nobody complains. The truck's interior feels like a sanctuary compared to the violence outside, though Marcus knows it's temporary safety at best. "Where do we go?" Kenny asks, wiping rain from his glasses. "The roads are going to be insane." Marcus considers their options. His construction experience includes emergency protocols, knowing where to find sturdy shelter when job sites become dangerous. There's a parking garage about 6 blocks from here. Reinforced concrete, underground levels. If we can make it there? A tremendous crash from behind cuts him off. Through the rear window, they watch as an entire section of the athletic center's roof peels away like opening a can. The steel framework underneath bends and twists under the wind load, moving in ways that steel should never move. Holy shit, Jim breathes. It's actually happening. The sight validates Marcus's premonition completely, but provides no satisfaction. If anything, watching the slow-motion destruction makes him more anxious about what other dangers the night might hold. In his experience, disasters rarely come alone. They cascade, creating new hazards as systems fail. Marcus puts the truck in gear and begins the careful journey out of the flooding parking lot. The water reaches halfway up his wheels, and he can feel the current trying to push them sideways. Hydroplaning becomes a constant threat as they navigate toward the street. There, Diego points through the windshield. The traffic lights out. The intersection ahead is completely dark, with only emergency flashing lights marking the cross streets. Other vehicles crawl through the standing water, their hazard lights creating a constellation of amber warnings in the darkness. Marcus approaches the intersection with construction site caution, treating every blind spot as a potential hazard. The truck's headlights penetrate maybe 20 feet into the rain before the light scatters uselessly. Navigation becomes a matter of following the faint outline of road markers and hoping other drivers are being equally careful. How far to the parking garage? Kenny asks, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. 4 more blocks. If the roads are passable, they creep forward at walking speed, windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the downpour. Through the side windows, Marcus catches glimpses of storm-damaged fallen power lines sparking in standing water, tree branches blocking lanes, the skeletal remains of a bus stop shelter twisted into abstract art. The radio crackles with emergency broadcasts. Multiple tornado touchdowns confirmed across the metro area. All residents advised to shelter in place until the storm system passes. Shelter in place, Jim repeats bitterly. Easy to say when your shelter isn't falling down. Behind them, another section of the athletic center's roof gives way with a sound like thunder. The building that housed their weekly games for 3 years is dying in real time, proving that Marcus's premonition was more than paranoia. But the validation brings new anxiety. If he was right about the building collapse, what else might his subconscious have picked up on? The vision felt complete, but contained fragments. He hasn't shared images of twisted metal that seemed too specific, too detailed for random imagination. 2 blocks from the parking garage, Marcus realizes they're not going to make it. The street ahead is completely flooded, with water deep enough to swamp his truck's engine. Emergency vehicles with flashing lights block the alternate route, dealing with what looks like a multi-car accident. Dead end, he announces, putting the truck in park. They sit in the cab, listening to the storm rage around them, each person processing their own thoughts about how close they came to being inside a collapsing building. The parking garage might as well be on another planet, visible through the rain but completely unreachable. So what now? Kenny asks. Marcus studies their surroundings, applying the same systematic thinking he uses for construction problem solving. They need immediate shelter that's structurally sound, accessible, and safe from flooding. His eyes settle on a small convenience store with a concrete block construction, not ideal, but solid enough to weather the storm. There, he points. We wait it out. As they prepare to make another dash through the rain, Marcus catches himself thinking about the vision again. Every detail had been accurate so far. The crack location, the failure sequence, even the timing. But there had been other elements, darker images, that he'd pushed aside as products of an overactive imagination. Now he wasn't so sure they were just imagination. The convenience store becomes their refuge, its fluorescent lights humming against the storm's fury. Marcus buys coffee for everyone while they wait for the weather to pass. The familiar ritual of normalcy feeling surreal after their narrow escape. Through the store's windows, they watch emergency vehicles navigate the flooded streets, their red and blue lights painting the rain in primary colors. "You saved our lives tonight," Jim says quietly, warming his hands around his coffee cup. "I can't believe how close we came." The words should bring satisfaction, but Marcus feels only a growing unease. The vision that warned him about the building collapse contained other elements, fragments of images that made less sense, but felt equally urgent. He keeps seeing flashing emergency lights, the sound of sirens, and something else ... The echo of a soccer ball bouncing on wet pavement. An hour passes before the storm begins to weaken. The tornado warning expires, though flooding remains a concern throughout the metro area. Marcus checks his phone for road conditions, mapping the safest route home for each of them. "My neighborhood should be okay," Kenny says, studying the flood maps. "It's on higher ground. Diego's apartment is closer, but in a more flood-prone area. I might need to crash at someone's place tonight." "You can stay with me," Marcus offers, though his mind is elsewhere. The Premonition's job should be finished. He saw the danger, acted on it, and everyone survived. But the feeling persists, like a song stuck on repeat. They leave the convenience store as the rain diminishes to a steady drizzle. The parking lot is still flooded, but passable if they're careful. Marcus starts the truck, and the familiar diesel rumble provides comfort after hours of uncertainty. The drive home takes them past the athletic center, or what remains of it. Emergency vehicles surround the building, their lights illuminating a scene of controlled destruction. The roof has partially collapsed exactly as Marcus envisioned, with twisted steel beams creating abstract sculptures in the emergency lighting. "Jesus," Kenny whispers. "Look at that." The northeast corner, where they always set up their water bottles, lies buried under tons of steel and concrete. The impact zone covers the exact area where they would have been playing when the structure failed. Marcus calculates the timing. If they'd stayed for their usual 2-hour game, the collapse would have happened during the second half, when everyone was tired and less likely to react quickly. "How did you know?" Diego asked, studying the wreckage. "I mean specifically." "You called it exactly." Marcus doesn't have a good answer. The premonitions have always been more intuition than prophecy, a construction worker's trained eye noticing what others miss. But tonight felt different, more urgent and detailed than his usual safety instincts. "Sometimes you just know," he says finally. They drop Kenny at his apartment first, then continue toward Marcus's house in southeast Portland. The roads are clearer now, though debris and standing water create ongoing hazards. Diego dozes in the passenger seat, exhausted by the evening stress. Marcus's neighborhood sits on higher ground, sparing it from the worst flooding. His modest craftsman house glows with warm porch light, looking like a beacon of safety after their harrowing evening. He pulls into the driveway, finally allowing himself to relax. "Thanks for tonight," Diego says as they gather their gear. "For trusting your instincts, even when it seemed crazy. Just glad everyone's safe." They halfway to the front door when Marcus hears it, the distinctive sound of a soccer ball bouncing on wet concrete. Slow, rhythmic impacts echoing from somewhere in the darkness behind his house. His blood freezes as the final fragment of his vision clicks into place. "Did you hear that?" he asked Diego, but his friend is already at the door, keys in hand. The bouncing continues, each impact perfectly timed, like a metronome counting down to something final. Marcus knows he should go inside, should dismiss it as neighborhood kids playing despite the weather. But the sound draws him toward the backyard with magnetic inevitability. His yard backs up to Thompson Elementary's playground, where a lone soccer ball rolls across the flooded basketball court. The wind catches it periodically, sending it bouncing against the school's brick wall with that same rhythmic pattern from his vision. Just a soccer ball. Nothing supernatural or ominous. But as Marcus watches, he realizes that fate doesn't always announce itself with dramatic flair. Sometimes it's subtle, patient, willing to wait for the perfect moment when guard is lowered and attention drifts elsewhere. The power line above the playground sways in the residual wind, its connection to the utility pole stressed by the storm's violence. 40 years of weather cycles, just like the athletic center,